день. Меня зовут
Hello, everyone. My name is Mikhail Khavin.
Mikhail Khavin. Я руководитель службы информационной безопасности.
I'm Chief Information Security Officer
Askona Life Group.
at Askona Life Group Holding. We have different areas of interests.
Производство полное.
We work with production.
Город Доброград, и школы, и медицина.
We have a business city of Dobrograd. We have schools. We have medicine. The coverage of our functionality is very wide and diverse. I would like to talk about the basics of information security for commercial organizations, and I would like to use my experience, more than 35 years, and to tell you about this in IT, in information security, and I would like to show you the economic benefit for having information security department in a commercial organization, and also try to voice potential recommendations for specific ways to make that department and its work more effective. But first of all, let us start with the question, do we need information security? And the answer will be provided by Winston Churchill, who said very right thing a long time ago. You have to pay for security, but you would have to pay with more for lack of security. The task of information security is very similar to a good marine practice, which is the captain is not at fault only if nothing goes wrong. The same applies to information security. If everything goes according to plan, then it's okay. But if something goes wrong, that's the question of security. Now let's take a look at the tasks solved by information security. Well, basically the task is one and only one: to provide content access of the information to the people who need this access for their duty. And there is a different, or maybe sub-task for cybersecurity, is to provide protection from unsanctioned and unauthorized access to that information, who also need that information, but they do not have the authority to get that access. Why do we do this? The reason for information security to exist is to provide continuous processes and continuous work of business. And why is that? Because the head management does not care why there is no access to the information or why servers stopped taking money for the products or services. Maybe there is no electricity in the socket, maybe a server gone wrong, or maybe there is a successful hacker attack. In all the cases, the result is the same. The main reasons for this to the main reasons are there is not enough reserves for the server. If there is an increased load, then the server cannot withstand it. If there is no system of reserved copying, and the system could suffer for up to 70%. Another reason is the low qualification of experts. Especially there is a very big deficit of engineers in IT and information security. For 2023, it's 700,000 people. And finally, the lack of these documents. There is no information security documents in commercial structures, they just don't do it. Now, where should information security be placed in a commercial structure, in a commercial organization? Security, in general, provides continuous processes. That's why information security controls the IT aspects of an organization and all the IT calculations. So if they do not have enough administrative resources, they will not fulfill their functions. Ideally,
информационной безопасности должно отчитываться
the head of
генеральному директору.
information security should report directly to the CEO. And this is what also required by the normative documents. Now let's delve a little bit more into the main reasons why. Reserves,
Тезис, который я впервые услышал в 1996 году.
this is what I heard first in 1996. The company must continue their work even if bomb hits a server. It means that there should be a reserved server rack with geo-reservation, basically a different energy district, different communication channels, different nucleus, a different communication node.
Кто владелец информационной
Who is the owner of an information system? There are a lot of misunderstandings here. The owner is not the administrator who maintains its work. The owner of the information system should be the main customer or super user, the one who actually ordered this information system. And the main problem here, or reserve, is actually their problem. They should fight for the budget, they should provide arguments, and it's very important to categorize all information system into 4 standard categories: mission critical, business operational, and productivity. Not many people do this, with the exception of some areas. Obviously, in banks, they do this. First of all, we are interested in mission critical and business critical systems. Mission critical are systems which, if they stop, will stop the work of the whole company. This is what's called inadmissible event by positive technologies. Business critical are systems which will stop, and they will either stop the whole unit or significantly diminish the efficiency of the whole system. These systems are the first to be discussed in SLA, in the documents, for loads, for idle time, for potential reserves. And finally, a very important question: how do you reserve efficiently and more effectively? Should you lease hardware or should you buy your own equipment? The standard time for new equipment to work is about 5 years, and the calculations are very clear. If you buy your own hardware, it will be 2.5 up to 3 times cheaper than leasing that. You will start to save on the costs once you get there after 5 years. And there are 2 schemes, 2 main schemes for reserve. The first one is the current checkpoint, when you need to roll back maybe a month, maybe a week for some tests. You can have a backup version, and then you can restore the system for what it was a week or a month ago. There is a different system, total recovery backup, and this scheme makes it possible for, well, if something has destroyed your server, for some reason it doesn't work, then you take a new server, you bring this tape with STRB, you have the fully operational system just in some time. Maybe you have to update the data. And this scheme is very actual in telecom, in banks, and pretty much that's all. This is the weak point in the fortress of our protection, our security is obviously a human being. First of all, our users who are either overloaded or do not have enough privileges. Maybe they are tired, maybe they do not follow the procedure, who open phishing emails, who do not change their passwords, and the rest. But even worse are subcontractor employees. And the practice demonstrates that almost never subcontractor employees would care about the customer security. Unfortunately, Darknet paid attention to this fact, and 60% of successful attacks in 2024 are attacks through subcontractor employees, and last year it was 15%. Now, just a few words on why Darknet collects personal data. Well, it hacks. It hacks it for credentials. These are hash for passwords, which in 80 or 90% of the cases could be used to get someone's password. Currently, there is a high percentage of attacks which happens using legitimate access. The passwords which were get through leaks in personal accounts. So what can we do with this? Regulation, continuous development, continuous education, trainings, workshops, two-factor authentication, to decrease the number of subcontractors and contractors, and they should use PALM, a system that logs and prohibits specific actions, and it also logs all the actions. And a few words regarding the errors which occur during critical operations or IT infrastructure, maybe during an update or so. They should be done with at least 2 people. One should work with the update and the other should authorize it. Otherwise, it will be just as a successful attack if there is a malicious user, malicious intent, or if there is an error. Now, let us speak a little bit about the stuff, about the people. There is quite a lot of specialists in information security, in information technologies, in state organizations which work with the state, but they are not suitable for commercial structures. And the reason is that people are accustomed to completely different conditions. They have good financing, they have great conditions. They are accustomed to direct, not to discuss. Usually, they are not very good psychologists, and they don't really understand the psychology of attackers or psychology of defenders. What else? They don't always have the modern or state-of-the-art tools, because not all of them are allowed to use in the state organizations. Based on the market conditions we've just discussed this situation at a similar forum, and the conclusion is that the market is limited. The access of new experts or candidates who want to become experts in information security is absent. There is no difference, and obviously state employees are cheap, but you would have to retrain them, just like you would have to retrain university graduates. And information security experts become experts at 30, 35, and once they are ready, once they get through this education, obviously their price tag will increase.
как я и говорил, замкнутый и плоский.
Just as I said, the market is flat and it's limited. We have Sberneft, Ashan, Miratorg, Shinamontaj, Askona, Gazprom at the top.
Появляется
And
какой-то
if
интересный кандидат,
there is an interesting candidate on the market, then a blue giant or a Sber, and they would just pay 300, 400,000 rubles, and they would take this candidate, and nobody else can do anything with this.
из-за этого
The dynamic of the wages is very high.
стоимость инженера была 250 тысяч рублей в месяц.
Previously, 250,000 rubles was the price of an engineer just a few months ago, but now it's 300,000 rubles, and it's average.
Которое я видел
Unfortunately,
к себе в альма-матер на физтех,
and when we're talking about continuous education, I actually went to my MIBT, Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology, and I discussed this with my colleagues.
еще раз повторяю, надо переучивать. Или
Programs are not appropriate. As I said, graduates have to be retrained or additionally trained, and we don't get these resources. We have nowhere to get them from. Now, let's take a look what happens on the other side. Obviously, I do not know all the details, but there is a changes in angles of attack. So, for example, if you have a model for potential threats, then in a year it will be completely irrelevant because there is a 10% changes for angles of attacks per month. In 2023, we were hacked multiple times for accounts, for leaks. What does this mean? It means that,
Ну вот, я могу задать вопрос для
well, I might ask you a question
информационной безопасности.
for those who do not work in information security or IT,
Глава же ответит. Не попаду точно.
and I can ask a rhetorical question.
От 3 до 5.
How many times do you use this?
И в личный кабинет в онлайн
Passwords. Maybe you use 3 to 5 passwords. You use the same passwords in accounts, in social media, in banks.
в Ашане, в
You
интернет-магазине.
use the same in different internet shops, e-stores.
Прежде, то
And if somebody
интернета полно.
lost their passwords 3 to 5 times,
Любой вход можно
then basically darknet is filled with correct passwords and every access can be legitimate. And that's why they look for personal data, not to get this personal data protected by the federal law 62. They need our passwords. I hope that you understand that the number of unfriendly people who want to attack is increasing. And unfortunately, I have to say this is true.
Сотрудников, подрядчиков.
When we are talking about
Могут вам подсунуть сотрудника
contractors and subcontractors,
у нашего соседа.
you could have a subcontractor employee who
Я не
works
придумал.
in a different company, maybe a competitor company.
Понятно, насколько все не...
That's for you to understand so that it's not a very good picture.
И еще один момент.
And another point.
Современное ПО настолько уязвимо, и что
The contemporary software is so vulnerable that during bug bounty or pen tests,
ошибок,
you can find so many
в том числе критических,
holes, vulnerabilities, and critical vulnerabilities that IT cannot just patch it. They do not have enough resources for a commercial organization, and this has to be taken into account
создание систем обороны.
when you create your cyber protection systems.
Следующая тема, наверное,
Next point,
самая тяжелая.
I think it's the most difficult one, in the sense that
В условиях дефицита финансов мы вынуждены
when there is a lack of finance, we have to choose between what do we do. Do we follow the law or do we provide the
пересечение требований
company
закона
security?
и с
Because when you superimpose those requirements of the real information security and the requirements of the law,
они об этом знают.
it's basically non-existent. And they know this. I mean, the people
Я
who
слышал такой ответ.
pass those laws.
Вы же поймите, вы
During the last
говорите наше
PhD,
положение.
I heard that, well, you have to understand us. We are
Может быть,
learning.
они на кошках будут учиться, а не на
Well,
нас.
maybe you can learn on something else, not on real people.
В качестве примера.
Just an example.
Я уже приводил 152 закон. Это
I already mentioned
персональных данных. Что они защищают?
Federal
Они
Law
защищают ваши
number
паспорты,
152.
защищают
It's a law on the protection of personal data.
о вашей
They
недвижимости.
protect your
Но там
passport
слова
data,
нет в
data
бровях.
about
А
your
так нет, а ходит всё
property,
говорит.
but
С одной
it
стороны.
has a
С
zero
другой стороны,
line
сейчас
regarding your
из-за
passwords.
неисполнения или ошибки
And this is
выполнения этого
what
закона.
Darknet is looking
Административная
for.
ответственность. Хорошо.
And you get administrative penalty for not
Компания
following
поможет
the law.
заплатить штраф.
Okay,
Но готовится
a company
изменение,
can
где уже будет
pay the
уголовная
fine,
ответственность.
but next time it will be penal. It will be penal
Что
code,
дальше
not
делать? И
administrative
кто
code.
пойдет на такой
Maybe
путь?
that's too much, and who actually be taking that
Поэтому с
responsibility.
законом все не здорово.
That's why it's not very good with the laws. They
Ну,
are
некий итог,
aiming at the wrong
пока.
thing.
Значит, вам нужен инженер, который
A few more points on the stuff.
глубоко
You need an engineer who has
понимание,
deep knowledge
знаниями в области IT, в области
and expertise in
безопасности,
IT, in information security,
который мыслит
in hacking,
стратегически,
who
который
can
умеет
think
считать финансы,
strategically, who can work with
который умеет
finances,
работать в одиночку и без подпитывания,
who can
у
work
которого
alone,
ответственность внутри и
and who has
внутри, а не
internal
по должности.
responsibility, more like commitment.
А вы понимаете, сколько стоит такой человек и сколько...
And do you know how much you would have to pay for this kind of expert and how many of those are there?
Фраза
Somebody said
пятикратного консула Римской империи, который атаковал
a long
Сиракузы.
time
Он
ago,
очень правильно говорил, что
there was a 5-time consul who attacked Syracuse 5 times. And he said that they are not fighting the Syracuse, they were fighting Archimedes, they were fighting Galileo, they were fighting Da Vinci. All those were engineers. And obviously they were security engineers too.
по поводу создания и развития, по поводу этапов развития.
When we are talking about the information security development process, the first step is that the head management finally decides that they have to have information security because it's worse without it. And there is a breaking point when the head of the department directly reports to the CEO, and usually the reports
о проблемах своих, а не о том, как все
talk about the problems, not about how everything is great. And then the company finally
рискоориентированный подход.
introduces a risk-oriented
В
approach.
производственных компаниях
In production companies, in industrial companies,
практически не знают, потому
people
что
really
в
don't know
России
about
этого
this risk-oriented approach
учат
because
риском, то только инвестиционным.
people are not
Курсов нет
taught this. People only learn about investment risks.
нигде.
There are no courses on risk-oriented approach in our higher education. Only people who work in Western companies know about this, because this approach
Умение доказывать
has
финансовые
been there for years.
компенсировать.
The skill to calculate risks,
И если
the skill to compensate for those risks financially. And if this understanding finally
значит, перевал пройден.
reached the head management, then they've passed the breaking point. Unfortunately,
В 90% случаев
Unfortunately, in 90% of cases, this breaking point
только после того, как происходит
is only
удачная
reached
атака, причем с
after a successful hacker attack.
события. Например,
And obviously, when they implement an inadmissible event, like the whole infrastructure of a company would stop, or maybe there will be destruction of the infrastructure. Only after that,
подчинение,
finances would open, there will be a redistribution, and CISO would start to listen to that. And it's not just our problem. You can look at the previous history and you'll see the same picture.
всем, кто здесь,
For everyone who gathered here, I would wish for you to get into this 10% of people who actually get over the breaking point before you are
типичные
hacked.
ошибки при
Now
создании,
let's turn to the typical errors and mistakes when working with
в третий раз,
information security
проблемы
departments.
с
So,
административным ресурсом.
first and foremost, administrative resource, the wrong hierarchy.
Нужного ресурса,
There will be no resource.
служба работать не будет.
If there is no resource, if there is no direct
Возникает
report from CISO to the CO, it will not work.
руководство. Может быть,
First of all, the head management are not sure. Maybe
ну,
it will be
к
okay.
сожалению,
Nobody hacked us in the previous 20 years, so why would it happen now? But unfortunately, this is what will happen.
Докатится, боюсь, до всех.
And unfortunately, I believe it will
Инженерам. Понимаете,
it will affect everyone.
инженеры-безопасники.
Next point is limiting the wages of information security. And people have to be on site. Remote, those could be developers, they could be engineers, but those who work in information security those people have to be on site, because the hardware will become comatose and nobody from outside can actually work. You would actually have to go there physically and plug out cables, maybe smack it a little bit, and only there you'll be able to correct its work. You cannot physically do this remotely. A few words on IT. Obviously, we control the IT from the information security, but I would like to say a few words on their behalf too. During the last 10-15 years, information security have become just as important as engineer service or fire protection service. So the same rules for this department applies. It applies for all types of companies. It can be high-tech, it can be telecom, banks, science, academia, IT, it doesn't matter. They have the same template. And finally, there is a mental peculiarity that the law does not affect everyone equally, and this has to change. The head management has to fulfill the instructions and the laws signed by themselves when we're talking about information security, and only then it would work. If they start to say that they don't have to follow their own rules, then in time, information security will not be able to function properly, because some people will have more privileges under the same law. I believe that even those who just left would have the actual questions. Where do we have the cybersecurity? Where do we have the tools and the stuff? Well, we will have people who delve into more details in the more recent presentations. But all those tools are just something, well, those are tools, they are used. What's important here is the person, is the engineer, who should have an ability to use the tool. When we're talking about solutions and like architectural solutions, the solutions should be asymmetric, but they should use standard cubes. The reason for asymmetry is that it should be unique. And the main problem here, the main aim here is to slow down the hacker so that they will not get to the core, so that they will not get to their target. Once they realize that they are in the quicksand or that it will take a lot of time, they just do not get enough money for these troubles, and that there is somebody else just around the corner, and it's easier to go there and hack them, they will lose interest in attacking you. And this is one of the main principles of building this protection system. Second principle is that it should be a human-machine interface, because only humans can actually comprehend the whole information. If you leave it automatically, even if it's a very good system and it's working on its own, then in some time it will be overloaded. We had this kind of experiments a few years ago. At that time, a very good system worked for 2 months, and then it was overloaded with information and different discrepancies. And finally, just as I mentioned before, you have to have your own protection. When you do it, when you outsource, you can do it only within these standard procedure in the document. Once you don't have a standard approach, then it's a different problem.
А потом я предложу вам приготовить свои смартфоны, потому что будет несколько таблиц, которые стоит, наверное, сфотографировать.
I'd like to share a couple of tables with data that you might want to take a picture of. As for hackers, bug bounties, and other features for hackers, I'm against that. A hacker could be a pen tester
Исследователям уязвимостей
or a vulnerability researcher
на контракт
only
в штате.
in case if they are directly contracted or employed.
Художниками
Any other attempts at playing with these freelancers might lead you to a situation where they change hats very often, from white to black and so on. You cannot control that, and we see it in real life. Any exceptions that you might know of just serve to confirm the rule.
основываясь на своей
So my personal opinion and my personal experience says that
обсуждается был принят.
that law that's being discussed
По
now
поводу бакбаунти
be passed.
такое же мнение.
I have a similar stance on bug bounty programs.
Конкурсное пентестирование с очень
These
большими,
are competitive pen testing events or programs
которые
with
могут себе позволить
large
только 5%
payouts
компаний.
that can be afforded only by about 5% of the companies.
В течение этого конкурсного пентестирования выявлено
During that contest, you might identify 100 vulnerabilities, you make 100 payouts, and the remaining 9,900 participants are left hanging in the air, and the rest of the companies cannot protect against them then. They're still hungry. It's easier with what I'd like to call white sharks. Another point on the dark web.
Есть уверенность в том, уверенное мнение, что попытки
I can say with some confidence that the activities by the secret services,
к сожалению, провалились.
where they wanted to set up the dark web and then control it, failed.
Попытки такие
It's a swamp. It's uncontrollable, even if different actors try to do that. It is just impossible, and we've seen it in the past few years.
индустриальные и профессиональные рельсы, промышленные подходы к
The dark web has been industrialized, especially in
и
deployment of ransomware
службы прибегают
and other blackmailing
для
techniques.
того, чтобы решить какие-то
And then we see secret services employing dark web actors for their own ends.
И
On to my last
на
slide.
этом, наверное, все.
I think I'll wrap it up here.
Тема искусственный интеллект, которая сейчас
A very present topic today is AI.
предлагает использовать везде, где только
Everybody is shouting about it from every rooftop and trying to apply it,
компьютер — это калькулятор,
whether reasonable or not.
он
a computer
нет разума, и быть его
is
там не может.
A
Там
calculator on steroids. It cannot be conscious. It doesn't generate anything new.
Все, что он знает,
It just
его,
imitates
всему,
whatever
всё,
it
что он знает,
knows,
всему
quote unquote,
его научили люди.
has been inputted
Они
into it
сами
by
не знают, что такое
humans.
разум, поэтому
But then
пока не
people
узнают, сделать искусственный
Don't
интеллект
realize
невозможно.
what consciousness is themselves. So
Поэтому
without
его,
passing
с одной
that,
стороны, не надо бояться, с
without
другой
learning
стороны,
that,
если вы
we
ему
cannot
доверите
create proper
принятие
AI,
решений,
AGI,
безусловно,
for
будете
example.
следовать его
So
рекомендациям.
nothing to be afraid of,
В том случае, если он
except
ошибся,
if you delegate decision-making to AI and follow it mindlessly, you'll be held
И
accountable
последний момент
if it
с
makes a
искусственным
mistake.
интеллектом, с такими вот публичными
Last but not least,
говноротами, как ChatGPT.
speaking about
Дело в том, что
ChatGPT
если вы в
and
процессе
other
общения с этими,
widely publicized
системами,
companies,
сообщите им
the thing is that if you provide your confidential information to them,
невосстановимую утечку этой
you
информации,
will
потому что база
be leaking
знаний,
it
база данных
irrecoverably.
таких систем едина.
The
Если
data sets or the databases for these systems are
легко получит
centralized, so if your competitor uses a clever prompt, they can take this confidential data
вот.
back out from the AI system. May the fourth be with you. Sorry for
А теперь
not quite sticking to the timing.
три таблицы,
And here are the three tables that I promised. Something to add to your
Эта таблица
wizard's
с
toolkit.
набором организационных
This is
действий,
a set of
которые
administrative and organizational
проводиться
measures
информационной безопасности.
to be implemented by information security.
Это технические решения.
This one lists technical solutions.
А вот это набор инструментов.
And this is another set of tools.
Спасибо.
Thank you.